Hello, everybody, and welcome to Meandering Market, the only show on the internet to have this specific face on this screen right now. We want to take time to remind everybody that while we all have a very strong passion for role-playing and storytelling alike, none of us are experts, and we do not assume that our opinions are 100% true for every single group. One of the most beautiful things about tabletop gaming is the fact that each group has their own specific and unique interactions with each other. And so we want to take time to let you all know that you need to take the time to assume that this advice is just ours and make sure it can actually apply to your group. Please don't ever take everything we say at face value because we are not experts. We're simply a bunch of nerds who have a lot of passion for this stuff.
We don't run your game. We're not cops or your dad.
Exactly. We're here to give advice, but they're more like guidelines than actual rules. Today we're going to talk about using role-play mechanics to feel more interesting and engaging in the story. Using role-playing to make mechanics feel more engaging and interesting for the story. So what that means is we're talking about taking the mechanics of the game, for D&D 5th edition is set, specifically, but it can go for any role-playing tabletop game that you're using, and making the mechanics of what your character can do to make the story interesting. So rather than just, oh, my character gets a +1 to their attack this round, or, oh, my character this next level gets to do this special amount of damage. Rather than just taking that at face value, using that mechanic that is already built in to be able to increase the storytelling at your table and make things more interesting. So I will pass it off to Daniel. We'll be going over 5 points today.
All right. So point number one, know what stats and skills correspond to the character traits you want to have. So this one at its core is really pretty simple, but it's one that can be really tricky, especially if you're a new player. I think the classic example is, I imagine you guys have seen, the tomato post on Reddit. The 6 stats in D&D are strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So strength, according to the tomato post, is your ability to crush a tomato in your bare hands. Dexterity is your ability to dodge a tomato. Constitution is your ability to eat a rotten tomato and not get sick. Intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And charisma is the ability to sell a tomato-based fruit salad. So the next thing to make sure that you understand is what proficiency really means. If you're new to the game, it's a really weird, nebulous concept, but essentially all it is, it just means that the things you're proficient in are things you have a lot of practice doing, things that you are really, really familiar with. In the case of Aaron's character in our current campaign, he is a warlock. He's very charismatic, so naturally he has proficiency in things like persuasion and deception, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or Caleb's character, who, he's currently playing someone who's very, studied in the religion of the world, so he's proficiency in religion and history. Just as a reminder that knowing all of your stats and abilities and understanding what they mean about your character will really help drive home kind of what your goal is for the character. If you're trying to play somebody who's like sneaky and really charming and quick-witted, you probably want to have proficiency in stealth and persuasion or deception. But if you're trying to play someone who's big and rough-looking, you probably want more like athletics and intimidation.
All right. So the next point we want to talk about is the narrate abilities and spells as you gain them. So this means a couple different things. One thing is if you prepare ahead of time for your character to level up, you can know, okay, my character is going to learn the fireball spell next level. So I want my character to start practicing fire magic. He's a wizard. He's trying to learn magic. It makes sense that he would practice before he learned it. Let's say you're a warlock and you want to learn a new spell at 3rd level. It's likely that your patron is giving you this magic, so maybe your patron taught you that, or maybe he just gifted you with the knowledge as soon as you leveled up and you're surprised. You're like, whoa, I didn't know that I could use this magic. That's crazy. Being surprising isn't a bad thing at all. Maybe your character is like, wait, where did this magic come from? I'm not used to this. Maybe I should learn more about what I can do with this spell. Or maybe they even use it wrong the first time. They're expecting some other magic to come out. And the first time you use it, it you accidentally hurt your friends a little bit. Maybe that's probably a bad idea, but you could cause some mishaps with certain spells that would be comical and fun in a campaign setting.
Yeah, my go-to example is when Lindsay's wizard first learned polymorph, and she couldn't figure out how to turn it off. So she just waited for the spell to run its course.
I think it's a great idea whenever somebody learns a new spell. The assumption is that they've been practicing the incantations, but the first time they actually cast the spell, it's like having a gun and shooting it for the first time. You know generally what it's supposed to do. You've never experienced the kick. You've never experienced the loud bang. And so if you're casting lightning bolt for the first time and it shoots out, you might not be able to aim it correctly. Now, like Aaron said, please don't shoot your party with it unless your party is like ours, in which case you're like, please hit me. Do it. just lay it on me.
I just need to feel alive.
But yeah, I think that's a great example of just like, they've never done this before. It could very well go wrong. And so just keeping that in mind can make it a lot of fun.
For sure. And honestly, introducing maybe a teacher or mentor type character into campaigns can make this a lot more interesting as well.
It can also give your DM a little bit of influence into what that experience is like for your character, because they can be like, oh yeah, I have this NPC, let me teach you about what you're doing. And so that way you can influence how it goes wrong, which is what all DMs want to do.
For sure.
Number 3 would be using your backstory to determine things like your character's class and background. So essentially what we're going for here is keep this part in mind at the character creation stage, because the backstory that you choose can mean a lot about, you know, why you chose the class you chose. Like, for example, if you chose to have like a sort of criminal background, you know, that can mean something very different if you're playing, say, a rogue than if you're maybe a fighter or barbarian, you know. Like, one of those is very much like you probably were a burglar, you know, you broke into places and stole things when people weren't there. But the other sounds a little bit more like a mugger or even a raider in the more extreme cases. So I think it's really interesting to try and use the story of what you've come up with to try and influence your character's personality and decision making, because every decision you make will tie into some ability you have. And knowing how and why your character would use an ability is tremendously important.
It's interesting because stats are almost like talent. The things you innately have. Proficiency are the things you worked to be able to achieve. So if you have proficiency in something, it doesn't just randomly happen in the world. Like, I don't just randomly like, oh, I have proficiency in drawing, I can draw now. Like, that's something you have to work at. So even if somebody has like a very high skill, that might not mean that they're practicing this particular ability. So when you have those proficiencies, using your background to think about it can really help you influence how your character became that way.
Yeah. And the other thing about like trying to determine like backstory is like, a lot of people think, oh, you've got to play this class really straight, you know, you've got to play into like the archetype of what it represents, but you don't necessarily. Like, I have heard stories of people who have played wizards mechanically who function more like gunslingers with a really weird gun. I've heard all kinds of stories of like so in a one-shot I ran a few months ago now, my girlfriend Sarah ran a cleric who wielded a longsword that was just a really big pie server. And she served the Platonic ideal of pie.
What class was she?
Cleric.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's one I haven't heard before.
Did she like cast spiritual weapon? It was just a flying pie, or how did that?
I don't remember if she ever did that, but I know at one point she cast fireball, and it was flavored as really hot pie filling, exploding and burning the monsters.
I think that's more terrifying than a fireball.
Kind
I
of.
don't like that idea.
A little bit. Yeah, but so like what she said was, I want to play something weird and goofy. I want to play like a cleric who serves pie. And so then we started like taking the mechanics and like really filtering them through that like kind of goofy silliness factor. And that's part of why one-shots are so good for just like practicing this idea and really getting good at it. Because, you know, it doesn't matter. You can be goofy if you want to.
Yeah, so our next and fourth point is use your character's personality growth to foreshadow feats and stat improvements. So we all know people who really like to plan out their character from level 1 to level 20. And there is nothing wrong with that. By doing
I do that sometimes, honestly.
It helps you, as you're going along and playing the game, know that this is where your character is going to go. And it helps inform the role play. But the opposite side of that is you can actually let the story influence what feats and stat improvements you take. Some of the best examples I could think of for this, my old character in our current campaign, he had a charisma modifier of -3. He was very bad at lying. But
it was a 5.
It was bad. But he really wanted to learn. So he went to Aaron's character, this very charismatic warlock, and kept asking him to give him advice on how to lie. And that went over the course of, I think, like 3 levels. And then once he finally got an ability score improvement, I took a feat to let him get proficiency in deception. He still wasn't good at it, but it at least allowed him to do it without a negative modifier.
It took it from a -3 to like a +1, so that was good.
My character taught him about partial truths.
Yeah, exactly.
Telling just enough of the truth that people believe you.
You don't have to lie, you just don't have to tell the whole truth. And so that helped him sort of get over that. And then another great example is one of our other players. She plays a wizard who is very, not pacifist, but she doesn't like violence. She's very good at it, but she doesn't like it.
I think peaceful is maybe the best word.
Exactly. But she was very upset that because she was a wizard, didn't have access to a lot of healing spells. So as she increased in levels, she started taking spells. I think they're homebrewed, right?
One of them is, but I believe Transfer Life is official.
That's right. I think you're right. But she started taking spells which allowed her to heal but hurt her character, and took that as my character doesn't know how to heal because she doesn't have those abilities, but she's going to find a loophole around it. And I think that's really interesting as well. So
yeah, and like it's objectively not a great spell, especially for somebody with as few hit points as a wizard.
Exactly. But
sure.
It worked out. Yeah, her having that has increased enjoyment at the table because whenever she uses it, we all know it's a big deal, and it kind of adds a seriousness to it.
It has become an immediate tension increaser.
Exactly.
For sure.
If I ever need to put you guys in a tough spot, I just put you in a position where Sylphie feels like she needs to do it.
She needs to heal. So those sort of things can really help influence your character. And on the other side, if your character has a weakness that they want to fix, I would suggest let them know in advance that they're going to need to fix that weakness. Another example, again, with the old character that I was using, he was an artificer. He was very much made for damage. And about halfway through the campaign, he suddenly decided he didn't want to hurt. He wanted to know how to heal because he saw the wizard doing that and wanted to be able to help out. And so he retired before he really got the chance to, but he began to try and figure out ways that he could better support the team. And so by doing that and going through those different efforts, they were able to influence where the build was going, despite the fact that they were built for something totally different beforehand. So if you are, say, playing a paladin who's just really gung-ho on smiting and killing, but then they begin to realize that they're really slow and they're constantly getting hit, have them start training each morning to increase their dexterity. And when you hit that ability score increase, it's not just something like, oh, they're faster. They've been training to that point, and it feels more rewarding for the character. On top of that, if a character wants to bolster a strength they've got, show them refining it even more. The best example I can think of is we have 2 fighters, essentially, in our current campaign. And
even though one of them is a paladin and the other is super homebrewed.
Exactly. But they're essentially fighters with magic. They're gishes. Yeah. Each morning, they spar with each other. Each morning is just assumed they get up and they have a sparring session. And so anytime they increase their strength, their dexterity, they level up, it's just to see, well, of course, they're training each morning. Why would they not? And so it really adds especially for martial classes, it adds a feeling of my character has gotten to this point because I've worked towards it. And they're really building themselves up. So, and the last thing I want to touch on for that one is a change in personality can mean a lot in terms of what a character prioritizes. Please don't worry about optimization. Worry about having fun. A lot of people have fun by optimizing. And if that's the case, please go ahead and do so. But don't sit there at the table and think you have to optimize in order to win D&D or it's the only way to have fun. I think one of the dumbest things that I personally have ever done is with that same ability score increase where I took deception, I also took weaving, a proficiency in weaving tools. Mechanically, gave me nothing. It was useless.
Useless.
But he was able to weave a carrier for a baby that the party had adopted, and he was able to weave a nice cape for Aaron's character. It was totally useless, but that was what I decided would be fun, is being able to do that.
The funny thing is that cape is actually really useful, and you've just never once had a reason to use the abilities.
Exactly. But I would suggest having fun more than anything. And if fun for you is optimizing, please do so. Or if you just see a spell that you really want to take and everybody says it's the inferior choice, figure out why your character would want to take it. Figure out why it would be useful for them. Because I guarantee you it'll have more fun if you do so.
My favorite example of that is our wizard not having Fireball. Because her character specifically doesn't like fire.
She's scared of fire, so she doesn't have the one wizard spell everyone expects.
She's got Lightning Bolt. She's got a couple other damage dealing spells, but she's mostly for utility.
And you know what? Never once have I sat there and gone, if only she had Fireball. We had actually pretty much designed our team around the spells that she and the Warlock have taken. And so we know, hey, try and get the enemies lined up so we can Lightning Bolt them. It just makes it easier that way. Also, makes it easier for us to dodge the Lightning Bolt. So
yeah, Lightning Bolt doesn't have a radius.
Yeah. So please just do what's fun for you rather than what you think is optimized. And if optimization is what's fun for you, think a little bit more on, okay, what would make it fun and optimized?
Yeah, try and make it interesting for the other players to watch play out. You know, like if you want to make your polearm master, great weapon master fighter, do it. But show that your character trains every morning trying to perfect their technique.
Mm-hmm. And even better, single out one of the other party members who's at least similar in skill or has something that can complement it, and go talk to that party member and say, hey, I can do all this stuff. Do you think we can help each other out on the battlefield? Because that will allow them to be included in your optimization.
Yeah, like if you have a monk in the party who's really good with their quarterstaff, have them train you in what good stick weapon fighting looks like. And then maybe that even inspires the monk to take, like, I don't know, Sentinel or something like that.
I just had an image of a glaive fighter back to back with a monk with a quarterstaff just fighting off a group of people. That's a really cool image.
Good image, honestly.
The last point we wanted to talk about is having relationships to other player characters and non-player characters reflect your multi-classing decisions. So let's say you're playing a wizard and you've got a person in the party that's a fighter, let's say, and your character is like, wow, this person's really athletic and good at fighting. What if I could do stuff like that? And decided to multi-class. Or maybe you meet a character who sells a lot of artifacts and goods and magic items. And he's like, well, how interesting would it be if I could make these for my party rather than having to spend our gold on it? That would be really interesting. And a great example of this is Caleb D'Artagnan. You've multi-classed how many times now?
Oh, don't ask me that question.
I think the more interesting question there is how many times have you rewritten your character sheet?
I have an addiction to revamping my character in multi-classing. Don't be me. I'm so thankful that Daniel has been as patient with me as he has been. I'm a bad player in that place. Don't be a bad player, please.
Yeah, for real. One of our other players recently was like, hey, I'm not super satisfied with how my character is. Can I reassign some levels? And I said, I have trained for this moment. Because D'Artagnan is currently 2 levels of Savant, the homebrew class. What is it? 4 levels of Ranger?
Yeah, 4 levels of Ranger and 7 of Artificer, I think.
Yes.
Jeez.
Don't be. I'm
Don't
so
be like
serious.
Caleb.
Don't be me, please.
Don't be like
player.
this. He regrets it every day.
That's a lot. I played a character in a one-shot that I had multi-classed in 5 different classes? I think you wrote it down, Daniel.
It was ridiculous. And
I have 217
this
damage in 1 turn.
Something like that.
And my favorite thing is that when you rolled that, you were like, oh, I was hoping it would be more.
Yeah, I built the character for 1 round of damage. And it was a lot of fun, but only good for 1 shot.
I did find it. 5 levels of Paladin, 7 levels of Ranger, 1 level of Warlock, 3 levels of Bard, and 2 levels of Wizard.
No, that was a wild character.
And all of it made me hate you.
That's a great example of multi-classing and not letting the role play inform it. It was hilarious and wonderful for a one-shot, but that kind of stuff probably isn't going to happen.
That would be functionally impossible to ever justify in a campaign.
Exactly. And another good point is you don't always have to multi-class your character. I've leveled my character every single level in Warlock and had a great time. I looked into multi-classing many times,
and part of that is because multi-classing Warlocks sucks if you don't do it early.
Sure. But another thing is I didn't think about it from a mechanical perspective. I thought about it, would my character want to learn this kind of skill? And really he didn't. All he wanted to get his power from is a Warlock.
Yeah.
And that's really what he strived to get strength from.
Yeah. And I know we've also talked, depending on how things go, we may reassign his levels sometime.
Yeah, at some point.
That's just how it happens. Thank you, Caleb, for that infinite practice.
Yeah, glad to have influenced the game that way. I will say that sitting there and thinking, would my character even do something else, is a very, very... a good practice in general. Sitting there going, okay, yeah, mechanically, this would be really interesting and fun. Is it something my character would want to do? And if it is something you think is really fun, but your character would not want to do, I would encourage you to figure out what might make your character want to do that. Because that can lead to other avenues of character growth you might have not considered. So
yeah, and if you're not sure about something, as the DM of a 1.5 year long campaign that is not over yet,
no.
Ask your DM. If you're not sure, they will help you.
For sure. And another point, again, on this is that with all these points, you can foreshadow all these decisions. If you want your character, he knows a paladin, and he's not your guy's not a religious character, but he is. And maybe your character starts praying to a god. And maybe that foreshadows the moving into a oath of a paladin or a cleric healing abilities. Just depends on what you want to do.
That's something in the 2-year campaign that I ran a while back. We had a sorcerer, and he wanted to go to Warlock. He wanted to be a coffee lock, which those of you who don't know what that is, it's a very optimized build. Yeah. But he did not want to just take it for no reason. And the reason he wanted to be a coffee lock is because it really fit the character he wanted to make, which was a sorcerer who could pump out tons of Eldritch Blasts while also having a Star of Crowns firing out. He just liked the idea of somebody shooting radiance everywhere. He thought it was really cool.
Okay.
So he was trying to be a coffee lock, but he did not want to be a warlock for no reason. And for 7 levels, he was playing an ASMR. And if you guys don't know, one of the ASMR's features is that they have this divine angel or entity watching over them that gives them advice. And for 7 levels, he would constantly reach out to them and send me a text saying, please don't have them show up. Don't have them say anything. He just had this entity that was supposed to be there totally ignore him. And near the last few sessions of the campaign, he said, I want them to show up now and offer to give him power. because the reason they've been staying back is to watch for him to prove themselves. And I was like, okay, cool, that works. I'll go with it. But he foreshadowed for 7 levels that he wanted to be a warlock, but just kind of held quiet, and I only barely knew what he was planning. So
Boy, that is dedication to the bit right there.
For sure.
That's the kind of player he was. But
And a point to bring up around that is, even if you really enjoy optimizing characters, it's not always, doesn't always have to just be an optimized perfect character. Flavor it around something, like give it a reasoning.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
I built a character for a future campaign that I was like, how cool would it be to have just a character with a ridiculous armor class? Sounds really fun, like 20 or above the whole time. And I was like, okay, but like, there's got to be a reason, right? He can't just be like armor tank that never gets hit. So I decided to make a character that had some trauma in his childhood and was scared of getting hurt. So and scared of fighting. So he wears a lot of armor and protects himself. He's a cleric of the forge and just hides from anything that could hurt him.
yeah. So yeah,
Hides from anything that can hurt him until it reaches the point where he realizes he's the only one who can just stand up front.
Yeah. I love the idea of being like, okay, my character's really, really good at this. Why? Because usually it leads to just something ridiculous. Like, God, I hate referencing our characters so much, but, go off what you know.
It's a good reference, honestly.
But my character in our current campaign that retired, D'Artagnan, he had an absurd movement speed. And he just kept getting items and spells that just let him go faster and faster. And so I did that by accident. And then I started to have to think, like, is that the case? And similar to what Aaron was just saying, I was like, all right, there was one point in his life where he just wasn't fast enough. So now he just has to be fast. And then he became Barry Allen. But it was essentially the same thing. But I kind of started to settle on that. But I think Aaron took it a step further by starting with that. And I think starting with it helps you really optimize to that point more effectively and play the character more effectively.
For sure. And I plan on letting the campaign and storyline and other characters kind of influence the character to maybe be a little less scared. But we'll see what happens, I guess.
All right. I hope this visit to our market has been enlightening, and I hope you walk away with some treasured memories. Until next time, thank you for shopping at the Meanderers Market, and come again.